So, rediscovering a president's home doesn't happen every day. And I think if anyone deserves a rediscovery, it's James Monroe. Of all the early presidents who contributed to the either founding or development of the young nation, I think Monroe is most in the shadows. We don't understand him very well. And I'm convinced that the small house, which turns out to be his guest house, has added to our misunderstanding of James Monroe, or maybe even a lack of interest in really studying his legacy, right? Here's a man not only committed to the certain values of the young republic and upholding the cohesion of the nation, but here's a man who really is cutting a wide swath through American politics. And we know very little about him really in the public sphere. So I'm excited that this discovery here at Highland is a chance for us to, yes, re-understand this landscape, but also to challenge what we knew or what we thought we knew about James Monroe.
We now know that this dwelling was James Monroe's original residence.
My first project about research wasn't so much about the property as it was about Monroe, because I, like most people, was not a Monroe expert when I got here. And I thought that the message about Monroe could not afford to be at all diffuse, right? We needed to have this laser focus. We needed to be really specific about Monroe and his contributions to American history. So if you dig down into what we're telling here at Highland, we're talking about Monroe and the arc of his career, but really we're also talking about the development of the young United States. So Monroe's story really has to tell also the story of these decades to be relevant. So I worked on that part of the story for quite a bit first. And I would say my first 6 months or so of content was really understanding Monroe and trying to formulate a new set of narratives about him. There were several pieces of the story that raised questions in my mind. We used to think that the small standing house was a remnant wing of a larger 1799 main house here. And it was thought that the larger wing only had been destroyed by fire. And the small connector piece, it was thought that that little connector piece was a remnant of the larger but mostly disappeared wing. And that was in fact a part that I didn't fully understand how that could be partially reused and turned into what seems like a coherent addition to the little house. There's a letter from James Monroe to his son-in-law, George Hay, September 6, 1818, and he's writing from Highland, and he talks about politics, and he talks about the work he's doing at his Loudoun County home, Oak Hill, and then he pivots and he says, and in this place, I am making some small changes. And he says, I have a new house just below the present one. Also in the letter, he talks about transforming the 3 rooms just below the well in which the servants formerly lodged. And so he's mentioned then 3 buildings or houses. He mentions the slave quarters, he mentions the new house, which is just below the present one, so just below the present house, right? So that makes 3. And we only had an awareness of 2 houses, no trace of the other. So we knew something was missing from the landscape. And so there was a reasonable chance that there was another house, whether it was the new one that was missing or the present one that was missing. In the 1970s, as part of the research that the College of William and Mary undertook when it first acquired the property, there was a good phase of archaeology conducted, and they dug under the Massey House and around the foundations of the whole complex structure. And they suggested several places to conduct additional excavations. And it wasn't really until I got here that we really acted on those recommendations. So when we began our excavation. We followed the 1970s recommendations, but we also decided that we would encircle the core, or at least the main house, entirely, so that we would sample it fully and not be guided by what we knew or what we thought we knew. And so we began excavating in May, I think it was, of 2014. And then it really became clear that it was impractical for me personally to lead the field work. And we hired Rivanna Archaeological Services late in the year in 2014, and they completed the survey in 2015.
We started out here with a comprehensive shovel test exploration, digging small foot-diameter pits on systematic grid. And in the area on either side of the pathway here, we found significant architectural remains suggesting the destruction of a structure.
It's clear that the debris that they encountered in the shovel testing came from a building. And so my question that I charged them with answering was, the building that contributed this debris, did it stand right there or did it stand somewhere else? And it's a, was it here, yes or no? And we were very fortunate. You know, the kind of luck we've had in this research is tremendous.
We were fortunate enough in some of our early units to come down on extant stone foundations below grade, about a foot below grade.
Coming right down on top of the foundation walls.
Then we worked back and forth from the archival record of James Monroe. He initiated several insurance policies.
There are three, from 1800, 1809, and 1816.
And each of those insurance policies provides us with sketches of his insured dwellings and the dimensions and the materials which they were constructed. The archaeological structure in the ground has a one-to-one correlation with the insurance policy. And it would have been a 30 by 40 structure with a kitchen wing attached to the western end. We do know that the Monroe house was destroyed by fire, probably sometime in the mid-19th century after Monroe sold the property and left. We do not have a contemporary description of the fire that demolished the house. So we want to try and recover material culture, which will help us date that event and know more precisely when it would have burned. One of the more interesting tangents we have taken chasing the material culture is some of the nails we were finding, we believe, are from the Jefferson nailery, because we know that in the late 1790s and early 1800s, Monroe ordered several thousands of nails from Thomas Jefferson at Monticello, right up the road, and that those nails were indeed made at Jefferson's nailery.
While we were doing both phases of archaeology, the original shovel testing and the larger 5x5 foot excavation units, we were also doing architectural history. We thought that the best way to really understand and get an absolute date for the house was through dendrochronology. And tree ring dating is great because it can be very, very precise. If you can get a date, that date is often down to the season and the year. And we thought that was the way to solve this. How dendrochronology works is that you get a core sample and it has the growth rings of all the years of the tree's life. And essentially, the thickness of the rings is measured to a very fine detail and put into a spreadsheet and theoretically at least graphed. And so then your sample is matched up until it finds the best fit on that established regional sequence. I have to say that this took a little bit of courage because once you start asking these questions, you can come up with an answer that transforms your understanding. And there was a risk that we could find out that the house dated from after Monroe's time here. And so our leadership at the college and on the Monroe Commission supported the research and said, you have to ask these questions. You have to figure out the truth, and whatever it comes out to be, we will deal with it. I always go back to that moment and think about that group of advisors and the administration of the college who said, yes, we're committed to finding out the truth. So we went ahead and did a round of dendrochronology, and the dates came out to early in the year of 1818. Of course, that corresponds incredibly with the September 6, 1818 letter in which he says, I have a new house, and it will be used for lodgers. And we take that from his context to be for guests. Of course, this is during his first full calendar year of his presidency. It's a busy time, and he does talk about his main house as being too small and too informal. It's a completely new understanding of Highland that really puts the focus on his presidency. We did not have an understanding of the deep questions of the house when I arrived here in 2012. I didn't know that this was in the cards, and it was certainly not on the mind of the group that hired me. That's not what we were thinking. But in order to have a good quality foundation for what we shared with the public, I felt it was important to examine that canon and to establish what we did know, and then push those edges a little bit into what we didn't know. No matter what we said about the little standing house being only a portion of Monroe's main house, when we thought it was such, still people saw this small house that's clearly a dependency building, and they formed their own opinions, consciously or subconsciously. I think our understanding of Monroe really was kind of like the second tier to Washington, to his later friend and mentor, Jefferson, and so on. And then the house had kind of given him a shade of being unambitious, or perhaps not worldly, where nothing really could be further from the truth. Monroe held almost every elected office there was to hold. He was elected to the governorship of Virginia 4 times. He was senator, he was minister to France twice, and then to England and Spain, and Secretary of State, and just itching to get back into the military end of things, served as acting minister of war. And so, Monroe was just incredibly ambitious. And I think we had somehow failed to see that. And we'd failed to really recognize his international experience, where he really is oriented toward establishing the United States' role on the world stage. This is a man who really sees the world, and I think really in the sense of, a chess player seeing that the moves that one makes now are going to make a difference down the line. I think Monroe understood the United States' role moving westward across the North American continent, and really understanding the eventual proportions of what the United States would look like.
There is a great amount of work to be done. To date, we've investigated probably 5% of the structure.
Our work has been limited according to what we can do, say, in a month. And so we open up that much and need to fill it back in to preserve it for the next campaign, and then we open up another section. What we want to do now is open up a big section of the site.
To open up more units and to keep them open for a longer period of time. And when we do that, we can bring visitors into the site, show them our excavations, talk about the features we've discovered, what they mean, how we interpret them.
Have visitors come in, probably on movable walkways, where, while we're excavating at one portion, the walkways will come and bring visitors right up to the edge, cover it with a canopy, and allow people to access it in all weather.
I think most importantly, our research has to be compelling to bring in the visitors and to help educate and contribute to the interpretation of the property.
I think the thing that is probably very relevant right now is to share the idea that history is always open to interpretation based on whatever evidence is available at the time. And we can continually add new evidence, and sometimes that challenges us to revise our narratives and therefore create new history, if you will, and that should be exciting. You know, we thought we knew all that we needed to know about this site. We thought we knew all that we needed to know about some periods of U.S. history, for example, but to dive deeper and to add new knowledge, it's exciting. Virginia is rich in history, and there are many sites that have been very well researched to now. And you know, you can look at it from one angle and say, wow, Highland is behind. You know, these other sites are refining their knowledge through the research they're doing today. And I look at it from the opposite angle and I say, what an incredible opportunity remains to us in 2017. And we have so much yet to learn and so much to add about Monroe and about Highland that I can't think of a better place to be than right here.